This morning, the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, Prime Minister of Jamaica, will address his regular quarterly press briefing with media. And we again say good morning to all present, including members of the media. May we now invite the Prime Minister to make his opening remarks, and then we'll face questions from members of the media and from those on social media. We're using the hashtag Action2018. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Naomi. Good morning, everyone. I want to start off by highlighting some of our achievements as a government. And I want to start off with tourism. Tourism continues to experience unprecedented growth as an industry in Jamaica, playing its part in Jamaica's growth agenda. The country recorded overall a growth of 5.4% for the first 6 months of this year. That's significant, with stopover visitor arrivals increasing by 5.9% and cruise visitors by 4.8%. And we expect that this level of growth will continue for the next 6 months of the year. Minister Bartlett is particularly pleased that we are now getting even more visitors from Europe. In fact, with the trips that he has been taking overseas, negotiating airlift, we now have a round trip from Munich, Germany to Montego Bay, which started on July 18th at an incredible price of $500 round trip. So we're going to get quite a number of visitors coming out of Germany and Greater Europe. Now, a development which Jamaicans should pay attention to is the growth of the Airbnb market. I am actually very surprised at the wide scale of Airbnb in Jamaica. In Kingston alone, it is reported that in 2017, Jamaicans earned approximately $24 million just in Kingston and St. Andrew region from Airbnb. And this is all a part of Brand Jamaica. And the beauty of the Airbnb solution is that it allows the average Jamaican to participate in the hospitality industry and use Brand Jamaica. And I know that Minister Bartlett has been working with the executives of Airbnb to streamline the service, to make it seamless, so that there is the scope for greater expansion. Minister Bartlett, I know as well, is very passionate about pension and housing for tourism workers. And the TEF, the Tourism Enhancement Fund, will be putting support to the tune of about $2 billion towards this program, pensions for hotel workers and housing. And there are a number of programs being worked on in that regard. The Tourism Enhancement Fund has also been supporting the NSWMA. And you would obviously see earlier this year, last month specifically, we had several fires. The TEF will be giving greater support to the NSWMA to ensure that we can keep these fires at our disposal site under control, but generally for the cleanup of our major townships and cities across Jamaica. I've taken note of various concerns raised in the media regarding our beaches. Let me state clearly that the government believes that the beaches are for the access of the Jamaican people. and that we must do everything in our powers to ensure that the average Jamaican can have access to our beaches. And indeed, that is the structure of our law. But some of our public beaches are in deplorable conditions. And by virtue of the condition of some of our beaches, they limit access. And so the Ministry of Tourism, through the TEF, has been improving our beaches. And I know that there is a program which is underway. And for example, last month, the Ministry of Tourism, through the Tourism Enhancement Fund, spent $38.3 billion. Forgive me. I'm thinking in large sums these days. Sorry, no. It's 38.3 million Jamaican dollars. You see, when we talk about tourism, we're always talking about billions. To improve the Marking Stone Beach in St. Mary. I don't know how many of you have visited that beach, but it sounds like a very interesting place. Minister Henry, we should make a note and go and visit that beach. The Marking Stone Beach. And there are several others. The Winifred Beach, I know that there is a program to improve that beach. So I want the public to know that the government is hearing the concerns and that we have a program in place. I know over the Emancipendence Week of celebrations that many Jamaicans would have sought refuge and relief at our beaches. And I heard that at some of our popular spots, they were overcrowded. We are taking note, and I'm certain that next year we will have a significant number of our beaches improved so that the public can have access to what was given to us by God and cannot be taken away by any man. I want to talk a little bit about work at the Ministry of Finance, because much of what is done in the Ministry of Finance does not always get public attention. But the work in the Ministry of Finance is critical for the building of the institutions of the public service. And you would note that we have passed several new guidelines to improve the public administration of boards and other entities. The Cabinet gave directions, for example, for the corporate social responsibility policy of public bodies. And those new rules are now being drafted and should be made available to our public agencies, public bodies in short order. However, we have given directions as it relates to, for example, donations. And you would have probably heard me make those announcements in Parliament. The Ministry of Finance repaid $58 billion in debt last month. And that's not what we are celebrating. What we're celebrating is that for the first time in a long time, we only needed to borrow back $10 billion. So the nature of government's debt diet is changing. Government financing is improving. And if we continue on this trajectory, where we are repaying more of our debt than we need to borrow, we will hit our 60% debt to GDP ratio, probably sooner than later, but we certainly will meet that target by fiscal year 25-26. Now that's a whole different ball game for public finances when your debt to GDP ratio is 60%. I don't think the average Jamaican can truly appreciate that because we haven't been at that level in decades. But the options for government, for financing public infrastructure, for spending on social safety net, for improving social services, all of that is just a new dynamic. Inflation continues to be low. And the statistics that I've seen last suggest that inflation is somewhere around 2.1%. Now that's incredibly low, and that's in itself a good signal. I'm not going to get too much into the economics, but you want to have your inflation rate at a targeted level because there is a correlation between inflation and growth. Of course, the economists will tell you that too low an inflation suggests that you're in a deflationary, maybe even stagflationary environment, which will slow growth. But the targeting of inflation is the policy of the government, and it is long signed off on, not by this administration. This was part of the IMF program, which was agreed by social consensus, and that cross administrations have been implemented. The dollar, of course, is topical. And I want to say that I have read most of the emails and messages that have been sent to me. And I have read, I would say, most of the articles that have been written. And I hear the general complaints. And I can well understand it. Because from a psychological perspective, a psychosocial perspective, you know, the country has long valued its progress, valued itself in US dollars. And when there is a devaluation, the response is always one of fear, sometimes to panic. And it is, you know, quite understandable. Quite understandable. But I think it behooves me to say to the nation that we are in a new era. We are in a new economic dispensation. And the transition to that economic dispensation will have these kinds of what I would describe growing pains. If you were to look at previous instances of the depreciation or devaluation of the currency, you would see that they have come against the backdrop of very poor fundamentals of the economy. Very poor fundamentals of the economy. But if you were to look in this dispensation, the economy in context, a Bank of Jamaica reserve of in excess of $3 billion. Now that's the highest our reserves have been in decades. So the truth is that anyone who is in business or who needs to purchase US dollars to do business, stepping back and looking at the fundamentals of the economy, would see that the economy is strong, if by the only measure it's reserve. Now, I want to just make an observation that whenever there is a movement in the dollar, and this is now an observation looking at monetary response from the 1990s onwards. Whenever there is a movement in the dollar, the immediate temptation is to take reserves, put it in the market. Now, I want you to think how counterintuitive that is. Because what is your reserves? The reserves is not just your savings, but part of the reserve is your long-term borrowing. So some of this money is what we've borrowed, but they're long-term repayment schedules. So we are literally taking our savings and some of our long-term borrowing and putting it in the FX market for it to be used up. Now, when you reduce your reserves, what do? You weaken your country. Because think of it. I mean, if there were to be any emergency, what would you have to call upon to sustain your external trade or deal with internal issues? You have to use your reserves. And if you don't have any reserves, what will you have to do? You have to borrow. And that has been the counterintuitive cycle of our policy across administration over many decades. So I'm just making general observations that as we transition into a new model of economic independence, where the country has strong reserves to sustain its external trade and deal with eventualities, many of which are external and exogenous shocks, such as, for example, hurricanes and other natural disasters, which we cannot take lightly. Because if you were to look over a 30-year period at the fiscal effect of hurricanes and tropical storms and other such disasters, these are unplanned expenditures. So it is absolutely important that the government pursues a far more nuanced and strategic policy. The policy of the government as it relates to the exchange rate is that we should have a flexible exchange rate. This is not the policy of the Jamaica Labour Party. It was also the policy of the PNP when they were the government. It is part of the general IMF context. And as we transition into that mode of a flexible exchange rate, we should pay close attention to the economic fundamentals. And if the fundamentals are strong, then any action against the dollar, against the fundamental, speaks to some kind of irrationality. But it also speaks to some kind of speculative behavior. And I think that is what we need to pay close attention to, that we cannot allow speculative behavior to derail the economic progress that we are making. So the market, I'm certain, will correct itself. And like all markets that are flexible, they go up and they go down. And the people who bet on the market, the speculators, they win, and maybe sometimes they lose. So, a word to the wise. Of course, just as a point of fact, I wish to point out that the movement of the exchange rate from February 2016 to present, when I say present, this was written August 8th, has been from 121.70 to $1 to 136.44. It may be a little higher today. That's a 12% depreciation. Compare that to the movement under the previous administration from 2012 to February 2016. The Jamaican dollar was at 86.61 on January 1, 2012. And by February 25, 2016, the Jamaican dollar was at 121.79. That's a depreciation of $41. Forgive me, 41%. 41% depreciation. So, in relative terms, yes, there has been depreciation. But when you compare it over the long period, I want to move on to national security. We started the year with major concerns about crime, in particular murders. Government moved, took instrumental action, and I believe we can say that the government strategy is working. I am not here today to celebrate or to say, you know, to sing praises, because the truth is that we still have a far way to go. But it is important to keep the public's faith in the policy. And just by way of note, in terms of serious crimes, murder is down 16.8% across the island. Shootings down 15.1% across the island. Aggravated assault down 22% across the island. Robbery down 9.4%. Break-ins down 7.2%. Larceny is the only one that's up, and I'm seeing here by 12.2%. But overall, accusatory crimes are down 7.1%. And to date, we have seized 51 guns and made 26 arrests for those seizures. I want to, at this point, reiterate that we still have a fund of $100 million for the reward for information leading to the recovery of firearms. And I implore the public to give information to Crime Stop. It can be very rewarding. To date, we have renovated 157 police stations across the island. We have equipped the police with several vehicles, including motorcycles and pickups. And we generally continue to make an investment in national security. You would have seen the delivery of 2 new Bell helicopters for the Jamaica Defense Force. And that is a planned program of equipping the Jamaica Defense Force with a fleet of 9 to, over time that is, to replace its aging fleet. This will give us significant capacity for border protection, for search and rescue at sea, for medevac, and for other activities which are important to the national security and safety of the country. And of course, I couldn't end this section without first reminding the country of how important it is to invest in infrastructure. I also know, and I have received many complaints, about the dislocation. And I have had a discussion with the NWA to ensure that the motoring public and the pedestrian public are treated with regard when these works are being done. Too often we see poor signage, unscheduled and unannounced disruptions, and I'm confident that in the coming weeks you will see a significant improvement. Certainly we are putting in place plans for the resumption of school, which I know, given all of the work that we are doing in the corporate area and elsewhere across the island, that you could have significant traffic delays. So we're planning in advance for that with the police and the NWA to ensure that the back-to-school season is seamless. We have completed the Barbican project. As you would know, many of you drive through that area. We still have concerns about how the residents and the general motoring public, how they use that thoroughfare. There is a question now of discipline. So it's one issue of you have to design the road with the indisciplined behavior in mind. That sometimes comes at a cost of the aesthetics. But the only way to deal with indiscipline, yes, you can design for it, you lose the aesthetics, but it is enforcement. And I have spoken to the JCF, and I have said to them, we cannot put $4 million worth of infrastructure to improve traffic flow, but because of bad behavior, the ease that we should have gotten from that investment, we are not getting it because people choose to park at no parking zones, park where the stoplights are. This kind of behavior must be called out. So I've given a direction to the JCF that they must increase their policing of that area because there's just so much design that you can do for indiscipline. We are also continuing our work, as you would see, on the Constant Spring Road. And again, I apologize for the delays and for the dislocation, but you'll be very happy when it is complete. It is not just resurfacing, but we are putting in larger sewer mains, larger water mains, and infrastructure for communication, and indeed infrastructure for smart monitoring and enforcement on our roads. So you will have a first-class roadway when it is finished. You would see that work is progressing on the Mandela Highway. We're almost there. Again, apologies for the delay and for the disruption, particularly for the residents who live on either side of the roadway, the thoroughfare. You would also see, and of course we're expecting that we would complete Mandela by the end of this year. And I believe, barring any significant rain or disruption, we should be on target to complete by the end of this year. Hagley Park Road, the 3 miles area, that is moving at lightning speed. And most persons who traverse that area, when it is done, it will be a total transformation. That area carries the highest traffic volume in the island, and it can be a knot. When there is knotted, everywhere else is knotted. And so by ensuring that traffic flows easily and unencumbered in that area, we will ensure that the entire corporate area, that traffic delays are reduced. So when we're finished with the infrastructure, what we would have done is to lay the foundation for improved commercial and residential and industrial development. So by putting in greater sewage, greater water capacity, and greater telecommunications capacity, developers can get higher densities, can have lower capital costs, because now they have a sewage line near them to connect to, and they can build put more rooms on the lands that exist. All of this will create a new energy in Kingston to transform the city of Kingston, to make it the city of the Caribbean. And Jamaica is very much placed to be that city, but we have to make the infrastructure investment. And I'm telling you, I'm getting so many inquiries now, so many offers, so many proposals to put up new structures, because people see the potential. They see the potential for downtown Kingston, an incredible piece of real estate right on the sea in a country that is center and central to the Caribbean, and they want to make something of it. But of course, the question is, you know, I can't put up these lovely high-rise buildings and you don't have the sewer main to carry the sewage, or you don't have the water mains to give you water, or the telecommunications facility isn't there, or the parking isn't there. And so we are making that investment now in the infrastructure. But most importantly, improving the infrastructure improves transportation, whether it is for your personal commute or for industry and commerce. And once we get that right, then we would have solved a significant part of the growth equation, because transportation is the first element of connectivity, the other element being communication. So we're doing what is necessary to create a connected economy. So ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you. I just gave some highlights of what the government is doing, and I'm ready for your questions.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Prime Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, I see several hands up. So we go over the rules once more. I will identify you. You wait to be identified. And then when you are, there are two microphones closest to members of the media. We'll ask you to stand, identify yourself, your media entity, and ask one question. We'd really want to have as many questions as possible. So if you ask one at a time so that we can... Let's start over there to my right, on the far right. I believe Ms. Saunders from The Observer, yes.
Good morning. Althea Saunders from the Jamaica Observer. Prime Minister Holness, the chairman of the board of the NSWMA has publicly expressed frustration with the pace of the divestment process. Can you say whether you have met with the enterprise team and what those discussions were?
No, I haven't had a formal sit-down with the enterprise team. There is a minister in charge of that. But I have been in constant dialogue with the person who heads the enterprise team, and I have been in email exchanges both with the head of the enterprise team and with the chairman of the NSWMA and with the minister. There is a reality that I have to deal with on a daily basis, and that is the speed of bureaucracy. You would notice that that was a theme in my presentation on Independence Day, in my Independence Day message. The best advice that I have been given, and Mr. Milverton Reynolds is here from the DBJ. The DBJ is the agency of the government that is charged with divestments. Milton, when was it that we spoke? Was it a couple of days ago about this matter? At Dembe, we were talking about the speed of the whole divestment of the solid waste management in Jamaica. And the outside estimate, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that you have said it is going to be between 16 to 18 months. Now, I said 16 and you said 18. So I'm going to revise it now in light of the media asking questions about it. 14 months. Let's get it done in 14 months. But the truth is that we want to get it right. These are very complex issues. So, I mean, the best way to point out is that it took about 2 years to divest the port of Kingston. And the negotiations that go into this, the documentation, the research, it is significant. It is not something that you would want to shortcut, because the cost to the government of a failure of the divestment could be even greater than the divestment itself. So it is something that you have to get correct. And so the IDB, not the IDB, the IFC, which is the commercial arm of the World Bank, we have ensured that the company that is, what's the term that you use, Milton, that they are the transaction advisors, that we have a world-class transaction advisor to make sure that the process has credibility, that when it goes to market, the people who will be attracted are people of high integrity and who recognize that the bar has been set to international standards. So, yes, there's no denying the process is slow and frustratingly so, but I wish to assure Jamaicans that at the end of the process, you will have a very robust solution.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Next question, Ms. Chisholm.
Thank you very much. Andrea Chisholm from TVJ. Prime Minister, last week TVJ News carried a story about former National Security Minister Robert Montague overruling the decisions of the board of the FLA as well as the review board, giving a gun license to a man with adverse traces. Please respond to calls for an audit into those 29 cases that were overturned and for the country to be told why the man, person A, was given the gun license.
I'm presently getting a brief on the matter that was raised in your story. I had previous information on the matter, but I'm getting an updated brief on the matter. But what has come to my attention in my discussion with the current Minister of National Security is that there have been cases stretching back 4 years, 5 years, of ministerial discretion being used to give firearm licenses to persons who were previously refused. And I believe all those cases should be investigated. And I have had discussions with Minister Chang. I have not said anything as yet to the Commissioner of Police, but as soon as I get my updated brief, which will include all the other cases, then after discussion with the Cabinet, we will take a decision, which is likely to be that all these cases should be investigated and there should be transparency and the public should know what are the reasons behind the use of ministerial discretion in that way, and indeed who are the persons who are involved.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Ms. Persis.
Good morning, Prime Minister. You see, I am a bag lady this morning, so please excuse me. Okay. I want to refer to your last comment in your opening regarding the legacy projects, sir. Looking back, was it a wise decision to do the road work concurrently? And my second question has to do with the road work in Junction. You didn't speak of the Junction work that's taking place now, but speaking.
And I apologize for the delays and the disruption for that as well.
Oh, okay, great. But speaking to our people in Junction St. Mary, these are the reports that we're getting. We're being told that some taxi and bus operators, they've doubled their fares because some of the areas that have been blocked off due to the roadworks, they can't, the residents can no longer go there, so they have to take alternative routes. And the other thing is that some residents are complaining that they can't get public transportation based on where the roadworks they've begun. So can you please respond to that, and whether it was a bad decision to do these legacy projects concurrently? Thank you, sir.
You know, I want to thank you for the question, because I've never reflected on whether or not doing legacy projects are bad decisions. I just took it for granted that legacy projects are always good decisions. But I suspect the other part of the question is doing them concurrently. Well, they weren't really done concurrently, because, we start, Marcus Garvey Drive, finished, then we went on to Mandela. Mandela is almost complete. So we've come to spring. So there is a scheduling in mind. There is a scheduling in mind. There's no question about that. And one of the things we always consider is the absorptive capacity of the country. So that was also in mind, because though these projects are funded, many of them under mid-P, but there are just so many contractors that are there with so many equipment. So you have to consider that if you do all the projects together, can you actually do them? So that is always in the scheduling of the NWA. So yes, we did consider how to schedule them. And so they are on a tight schedule. There's no question about that. But I think the country has to get used to the pace of growth. And the pace of growth is not one project and a next project. And it is the synergetic effect of having several projects all moving together, which literally forces the expansion of your absorptive capacity. Because it gets people to the point where they say, you know what, I need to bring equipment in to participate in this. And it creates its own dynamic. The dislocation, however, has to be better managed. And I have received the reports about the Junction Road. And I see Minister Warmington here with me. I have not yet had a direct discussion with him on the matter. But since you have raised it, and from what you're saying to me, the dislocation is significant. Minister Warmington, afterwards, we need to see how we can address the junction issue. It's not the intention of the government to in any way disrupt the economic survival of the people we are trying to serve.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. May I remind members of the media of our rule earlier?
No, I think the people of Junction, if you ask them, are you happy that you're getting the road?
All right, we'll take another question from the floor here, but may I just remind everyone of the rules that we set out earlier so that everyone can get an opportunity to ask a question. Certainly just one, then we can come back to you, all right? So I recognize Yanil. I know Mrs. Jackson-Miller had a hand up, but prior to her, we'll have the young lady over there, and we'll take a few from social media. Yes, Yanil.
Yanil Wood from TBC Radio. Mr. Prime Minister, I hear your comments or response to Janella. However, I don't think I'm going to be happy, or I don't know if I'm going to be happy at the end of all the roadworks, because I feel like I may die from stress. And I'm referring particularly to Mandela, because I live near to Central Village. My second question, because she took away the first one, is were there any plans put in place for an emergency? Suppose something is happening that side of the island, and persons need to move out quickly. What will happen when we reach ferry? Because if one vehicle breaks down in the morning, you are stuck for hours upon end. Did anybody put any plan in place to determine how persons will get out quickly if there is need?
I wish to assure you that when the ferry corridor at Mandela Highway was being done, we did the stress testing of the various possibilities that could happen. And at the end of the, one of them which you mentioned, when a vehicle breaks down, the effect when there is a pileup of several vehicles is that there are several wreckers standby, positioned on the Mandela Highway just for that eventuality. We considered residents who were not able to get transportation to get to the communities along the way. We have provided buses. Minister, you can guide me on that. Some of them free of charge. That takes them from... Minister, you want to come and explain? Right, so they do travel the service route. But the bigger question is, if there were a major event on the western end of the island, and people needed to get in, that currently it would be a bottleneck. And the response to you is, if there were such an event, we would deploy fully the security forces to clear the corridor and ensure speedy movement. So we have stress tested, we have looked at the eventualities. There are just some inescapables. And as you would have seen, that as the work makes progress and we pave certain areas, we make those areas available. And that has been easing the congestion on the road. The problem now is on Washington Boulevard, where we are laying new sewer mains and other infrastructure. But I can only appeal to the public to just bear with us. The longer term is, a much better city for everyone.
All right, Mr. Prime Minister, we have one from social media from Carl. He's asking for an update on the Industrial Park Investment Initiative.
Well, there are at least 3 industrial park initiatives. There's the overarching special economic zones, but I suspect that Carl is asking about the Gansu Gisco project. Minister Henry is here. Minister Henry has full sight and charge of that. And, Minister Henry is the infrastructure multimodal man, and I would invite him to the podium to give an update, if you're prepared.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I think I would prefer to call a specific conference on the update of Gansu. It is moving apace. It's on target in terms of dates and times. It has, however, issues that must relate to policies, which has to be decided with the substantive minister I speak to, whether it's under the economic zone or moving to a strategic investment. But it is full of pace, and by October, the various areas will be met, but it'll have an impact too on the growth of the area. In that term, so I think I'd prefer to call a specific and provide all the details and the answers within the framework agreement that we are. But we are on target, and perhaps a little bit ahead of target, so that basically action 2018 means implementation 2018.
Thank you so much.
Just to give a little bit more information on what Minister Henry pointed out. The magnitude of the investment is such that we have to make a decision as to whether or not we classify it as a strategic investment or carry through the investment under the existing framework of the special economic zones. And that really has to do with government understanding what are the trade-offs between the fiscal incentives that you would have to give to attract such an investment versus the benefit of the investment. And the government has to interrogate that to the point where it is satisfied, because we already have set incentives under the special economic zone legislation with an authority that deals with that. But let's say, for example, somebody comes to you and says, we're putting down $6 billion worth of investment. We have to find out, what will that really mean for the country? Will it be $6 billion locked off in an area that doesn't circulate out? Or how do we get the $6 billion to circulate within the economy and not within just merely an exclusive zone? So there are many issues that the government is looking at carefully. We're not just going to jump into an investment of that nature. One thing you will notice about this government is that we take our time, we deliberate, and we are deliberate in what we do.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. At the back, Mrs. Miller.
Dion Jats Miller, RJR Group. In relation to beach access, Mr. Prime Minister, you said a little earlier on that our public access really is a structure of our law. For all practical purposes, though, it is, apart from perhaps prescription and easements, all the law does is say that you can come in through the sea onto the foreshore up to the high water mark, which is useless for most people. I'm saying this to say that I understand from Mr. Vaz that a draft beach access policy has been completed, is to come to Cabinet by September. I'm wondering whether you are actually, though, open to the idea of amending the law itself to allow for meaningful access, which does not now exist, and whether this is going to be given priority, because we've been talking modification of this policy and law for years.
I'm going to answer your question, but Minister Vaz, would you want the opportunity to just update on the access policy?
I think Dion and I have had this discussion off air and several other journalists. There is a beach access policy that is now in front of Cabinet because of what has transpired over the last few weeks. I'm intending on taking it as soon as the recess is over. The issue that you raised a while ago will be deliberated because that's a major issue in terms of the access to the beach, and you are correct in what you indicated. But it is not, it's something that has been going for quite a bit of time, and the time has come now for it to be dealt with. And as soon as it is deliberated, we will make it public. And if there's requirement for further consultations based on Cabinet directives, we will do so, because what we want is a holistic policy that works for everybody, works for the investor and works for the public. Thank you.
Dion, let me say I don't want to preempt what the Cabinet may decide, but I did make a statement which is an expression of how I feel about this beach access issue, which I think that it would identify with the sense of the average Jamaican. So whatever influence I wield on Cabinet, it would be along the lines of what I've expressed, which is that, you know, I feel that Jamaicans must have access. And the policy, I'm certain, will raise some of the issues that would go towards what you term as real changes and amendments. So I suspect that the debate will, within the context of the Cabinet, move towards some amendments to the legislation.
All right, I saw a hand beside Mr. Barnett, and I noticed the male journalists have not asked their questions. I'm coming to you, not favoritism to the women. But yes, Madam.
Good morning, Sashana Small from Business Access TV. Mr. Prime Minister, inflation is low, but it's also below the IMF target of 4% to 6%. In fact, the IMF has called the central bank to a meeting to address this to get the inflation back on target. So how do you respond to critics who genuinely believe that the central bank is manipulating the foreign exchange to get the inflation back on target?
I had a long discussion with the Minister of Finance about this issue and the speculation around it. I've not yet had a discussion with the governor, and for good reason, that, you know, in the society that is evolving, there are some institutions which are just independent, that, you know, prime ministers and ministers ought to be very careful even how they communicate with them. What I have said to the Minister of Finance, however, is that he should ensure that the critical players in the market, that they are thoroughly informed, because information changes behavior. And I know that the minister has been conducting a series of meetings with the various interest groups. I know he has met with the JMEA, with members of the PSOJ, has been meeting with business leaders and explaining the policy of the government. And so far, I believe that they understand, that they are processing information, and I'm certain that you will see in the coming weeks a change in the perspective on the government's policy. I'm not going to comment on this matter, which is the specific issue you raised, as to the inflation targeting, other than what I have said in my opening comments, and for good reason. I wouldn't want to be saying anything that could in any way be interpreted and creates any dissonance. So on the specific matter, I have asked the Minister of Finance to be the sole voice to explain the policy to all the stakeholders and to the public. And he has been doing so. He's writing op-eds and he's meeting directly, and he will, in short order, make a statement. He has planned a series of public events to explain the policy. So my response to you is that look out for those explanations coming.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Going back to social media.
Including a town hall. So he will have a town hall on that specific policy.
All right. Going back to social media, Liz Levy is asking, why wasn't the JPS asked to put power lines underground, as the power lines above ground are subject to theft, blocking trees, and so forth?
I'm just speaking now from my recollection of conversations I've had with the NWA. There are some instances where power lines, for strategic reasons, will be underground. But generally, putting the power lines underground are an expensive venture and could drive up the cost. And this is just from my recollection. I could get a more detailed answer and provide it on social media, since that's where the question is generated from. But I'm just going from my recollection of a discussion that I had with the NWA regarding why not put some of the power lines underground. But by the way, just to be clear, they have made provision for other infrastructure to be underground, including communication infrastructure. So all the cablings for telecommunications are piped underground.
Thank you, sir. So now we go to a mail report, and I see the others now joining for us. Mr. Fitzhenley.
Abka Fitzhenley, Nationwide News. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning.
When exactly do you plan to announce a ministerial appointment regarding the portfolios vacated by Dr. Wheatley? And in so doing, do you intend to make any other adjustments to the cabinet? If the answer to the latter is in the affirmative, what are the factors guiding your consideration? I
thought you were going to ask me to just tell you who I'm going to appoint. Well, let me get to the heart of the question. I don't want to have too many portfolios under my direct supervision. And so I agree totally with the concerns raised by many Jamaicans about the size of the ministerial responsibility, not just the size of the OPM, but just my own ministerial responsibility. So I wish to assure my friends who are concerned about me that I'm also concerned about myself, and that I am putting in place the necessary solutions to ensure that I can very early divest myself of some of the responsibilities that I have taken on. In a sense, some of these things are inescapable when you are the Prime Minister, because you are ultimately responsible. And so you have to have the capacity to take on some of these issues, but recognize that, you know, you're not superhuman. So as it relates to the portfolio of energy, the portfolio of energy is so critical to national development. And there are so many issues in that portfolio that requires really the attention of the Prime Minister to get them resolved. But they are not issues that require day-to-day detailed management. They are really very high-level policy issues that need to be resolved. when it comes to high-level policy, I have taken the position that I should not make policy alone. So, for example, what is Jamaica's position on CARICOM? I put a commission together to guide that policy so that it becomes a national policy. You know, what is Jamaica's position, for example, on violence? How are we going to treat with this epidemic of violence? We're working on putting a commission together to guide government's policy. What should we do with Petrojam? Petrojam is, you know, a creature that is very difficult to place in the public sector. It's a company that should be operated on private sector rules. It's owned by the government, but they're not really owned by the government fully because it is under a joint venture agreement with our friends in Venezuela. Everything is changing around Petrojam. JPS is not going, which is his major customer, is not going to be using so much of its fuel anymore. It could knock off 70% of the volume of their sales. Many people in Jamaica is watching what's happening in Germany, where Germany has said they're going to move to ban heavy diesel vehicles that use heavy fuel oils and diesel and so forth. They're going electric. And other countries are following. Jamaicans will soon start purchasing electric vehicles or use LPG. So the question is, what do we do with Petrojam? It is designed for an era that is passing in terms of the fuel that it produces. So we need to make a strategic decision, and it is a major asset. Are there other opportunities out there? Could we transition to more refined fuels? What would be the cost of that transition? Is it a cost that we should bear? Or should we just import the fuel rather than refine it here? These are all decisions. And then there is the geopolitics. We are in partnership with Venezuela. There is, we can't ignore it, there are sanctions against Venezuela, which affects our trade in the business. So these are matters that really need incisive analysis. And so I'm not making those decisions sitting in my chair upstairs alone. I'm seeking guidance. And that's why we have prepared the terms of reference, which we will release after today. We'll release it today. It's finalized. Sent the TOR to the opposition. I've had their comments, and we have considered them. We have spoken to persons who we are inviting to serve on the commission. They have agreed. We still have one or two persons that we're just tidying up details with, and we should have the commission named very shortly. So that is progressing. So, and then there are other high-level issues within the energy sector. For example, you know, should we divest Wigton? And we have basically taken a decision to divest it. But what is the nature of the divestment? Is it that we're going to put it on the stock market so that Jamaicans can buy up the shares and own it, so that the pension funds and insurance funds can have other options than trying to invest in US dollars? And I hope Jamaicans are seeing the strategy. That the drive towards the dollar is not just speculation, but you know, we can't make the US dollar be the only investment asset in town. That when you have Jamaican dollar profits, the only safe place to put it is in US dollars. We have to take national assets that the government is sitting down on without the entrepreneurialism behind it to pair assets with business energy to increase the value of the asset and then have you own it. And so we have made some decisions about Wigton. I want to see those decisions through so that the public can participate. Then there's, of course, JPS. Government owns a fair stake in JPS. You know, many businesses would want to have a stake in the power company. And that's how it is. In all developed economies, the big insurance funds, the big investment funds, the big pension funds, where are they invested? They are invested in infrastructure. How many of our, you know, what percentage of our insurance and pension funds are actually invested in Jamaican infrastructure. But yet, we have so many people coming from overseas to invest in our infrastructure. And what we do, our system is set up so that our pension funds, our investment funds have to go and buy US dollars to invest in overseas infrastructure. So what I'm saying is, as I said earlier, we are in a transitionary period in our economy. We are taking wiser decisions. We are taking decisions that are more thoughtful. So that's on the energy front. So I want to see those high-level decisions through. The energy portfolio as good administration from the civil service and public service point of view. And as soon as the Commission delivers its report and the divestment agenda is clear, then I don't need to have that under my supervision anymore. In terms of the telecommunications and the science and technology aspect of the ministry, when I met with Dr. Wheatley to discuss his resignation, one of the things that I had said publicly and was noted in his letter of resignation is that there has to be a governance review. This is quite different from the reviews that are taking place with the other investigative bodies. But I need to be sure that the boards were properly empaneled. That's a process. So last week, I had back-to-back meetings with all the boards. Maybe one board is left that I have two, that I have not yet met with. Hopefully I'll close those meetings out before the week is out. Board members were not available, some were traveling, and so that has kind of shifted my date. What I've discovered in meeting with all the board members is that generally the boards are properly empaneled, meaning that they have functioning chairmen, that they have gone through governance training, and several of them have said to me they have actually had training twice, that they meet regularly, and that they are properly mandated, meaning that the minister has given them policy direction. But like all other ministries, we also find in this one, and it's an interesting exercise which I probably am very much now tempted to conduct it with all the other ministries, because it's very eye-opening. Because a lot of the slowing down of government starts at the policy level, where there is conflict between, you know, what the administration understands, when I say administration, what the civil service administration understands to be policy, and the direction coming from the minister. And sometimes the civil service is on a track, so they are carrying policies that are going, you know, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. The minister has changed policy, or, you know, something has changed in the environment, but the two things haven't resolved. And so sometimes, you know, it creates the conflicts. And I'm seeing some of that. So for example, the government electrical inspectors, a policy decision was made some time ago that service should be contracted out. But it hasn't happened yet because, you know, there's a perspective that maybe it shouldn't be. So as, you know, there are policy decisions that need to be made to put those things back on track. And so we have discovered a few of those just going through the board, as we have taken note. And I'm going to take some time to go through, give the policy directions where necessary, to make sure that those things are on track. Some boards were expired. And I'm going to, you know, take some time, because I didn't know that so many of the boards had actually expired and were extended. So I'm going to properly empanel them now, select persons, consult with the cabinet, and properly empanel the boards. And then during that process, I will name a new minister. And then the question that you have asked about a reshuffle, I wouldn't term it as that, but it's obvious that there would have to be, let me find a diplomatic term, but there will be some moving around. You know, I don't want to use the term. Yeah, some realignment. There'll be some changes, obviously. And I've already started consultations on that, just to make sure that in making those changes, that in correcting one problem, I don't create another problem. And the public is entitled to be anxious about this and to say, what is happening, why it isn't moving faster? But rest assured, I am only going to move at what is the pace of what is right. So, you know, I try to give myself quick timelines, but if things happen that require further scrutiny and inspection, then that is what I'm going to do.
Thank you, sir. There are a few more questions from the floor, and we do note the time being 10:45. So I'll take a few more questions from the floor. Let me take one, though, from social media. Jerome says, Harbour View to Morant Bay. Can you give us an update on that one? Then we'll take Alexandria from the Gleaner.
My last update is that there are some issues regarding the loan approvals process between Jamaica and the funding party in China. The Ministry of Finance and our Chinese counterpart are resolving those issues. My understanding is that they are very close to a resolution. But the NWA is already mobilized. They have put together their work schedule. So basically, we're just awaiting the finalization of the loans. And these multi-billion-dollar loan packages, the devil is in the detail. And so we have to pay attention to that.
All right, let's just go to the Gleaner.
Serrano Baines from the Gleaner Company. Mr. Prime Minister, when will you outline the post-ZOSO and post-state of emergency anti-crime strategy? And seeing as though I may not get back the mic, are you moving to amend the standing order to allow sleeveless attire in Parliament as well?
All right, so you deliberately wore your sleeveless jacket today. No, let me start with the sleeveless. Having paid attention to the debate, Cabinet took a decision, having looked at the pros and cons, that there was nothing in law that prevented someone from accessing service because of dress. And therefore, we gave general guidance to all public institutions that fall directly under the supervision of the government. That is the central government, and indeed it would apply to local government as well, about not denying persons by virtue of wearing sleeveless. That would have to now be interpreted within the context of the respective institutions. So for example, hospitals, they have a health concern. So their dress code is designed by virtue of health. But they are obligated to now look at the direction of the government and look at their policy and see what is absolutely necessary for health versus what is just, you know, a general cultural stance against entering public institutions. The courts, you know, they are an independent, well, you know the courts, they are an independent body. So obviously they will have to look at their own rules and adjust accordingly if they so desire. But it would not be good, in my opinion, and I'm entitled to it, to have someone deny justice because of a sleeveless dress. Schools, again, they would have to look at their rules. And there are other issues with schools which I won't get into. I gather that that matter is before the courts, and they will make a pronouncement on that soon. Parliament, I read the Gleaner, I saw the Gleaner caricature today, quite amusing. The truth is that the Speaker is correct. There is a standing order, and the government's policy does not automatically change the standing order. There is a process. And so what we will do is we will instruct our House Leader to initiate the Parliamentary Committee to discuss that matter and, of course, bring the standing order in line with Of course, there's going to be robust debate in Parliament, but I think that the general sentiment for which MPs should pay attention to is that we should align our policies to modern thinking.
Thank you, sir. I'm coming back to Ms. Chisholm. Before her, though, her colleague in the same role had a question prior.
Mr. Prime Minister, good morning. Paul Clark here from the Gleaner.
My apologies, Paul. 1 second. Sir, you did not respond to the security question, and our colleague, something about security, Serrano?
Well, let me percolate it a little bit.
Yes.
And I'll come back to your question on security.
All right. Paul, yes.
Yes, Mr. Prime Minister. The JUTC continues to be a failing entity financially. Are there any plans to revisit the old situation where that is concerned? The Transport Minister said that you'd have more taxes on certain routes. And does this conflict with getting the JUTC into a more profitable state?
I wouldn't say the JUTC is a failing organization. I think the JUTC has not been profitable. And it is rare that a public transportation agency is profitable. It's not designed to be a profit-making entity. And you have to accept that public transportation always carries with it a certain amount of public subsidy. The level of it we have to manage. The challenge with the acceptance that there needs to be some amount of subsidy is that you can't always tell what is the genuine subsidy versus subsidizing waste. And that is the challenge with the structure of the JUTC. The direction from a policy level that has been given to the JUTC is that they must integrate smarter technologies and more efficient fuels and do better timetabling and scheduling to increase the efficiency of their operations. In fact, there are several studies and programs being done now regarding fuels, the possibility of a conversion to LNG or LPG that would significantly improve, from a technical and theoretical perspective, could significantly improve the balance sheet of the JUTC. The JUTC has also been implementing smarter measures to control theft of its assets and stocks, and to better manage its cash. So I do know that there are significant efforts to make the JUTC more efficient. As regards to the minister's statement about more taxes on certain routes, I have not had a detailed discussion with him on this policy perspective, but I suspect that he would be referring to routes that are underserved. So I think I'd answer generally your question.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Ms.
Go back to the, well,
the
you want to take
yes.
a,
Okay,
right, so the national security question. I want to dispel this false notion that there is no security plan. I couldn't stand here and announce to you the reductions that have happened without having a plan, a systematic approach to this matter. And any Jamaican who believes that what is happening is just by virtue of coincidence would be grossly mistaken, or would have fallen prey to the very devious propaganda being spread by some agents who look on the success with bad mind. You know, I have a letter upstairs on my desk from a little girl at St. George's Primary School. She wrote to me. I mean, I laughed. She said, Mr. Prime Minister, don't tell them the crime plan, because when you tell them, the criminals will hear. And I laughed. Yes, the public is entitled to information. And the zones of special operation and the state of emergency, even if I wouldn't want to, forces you to go to Parliament and give details of operations. And at all those debates that have taken place, they are all strategy debates. And if you watch them, the opposition is there interrogating and probing and asking all kinds of questions. So in effect, it is not just the Jamaica Labour Party administration's policy. The opposition is participating in it in Parliament at every step. Now, there are wider policy thinking going on, which I have to be absolutely careful what I signal. Because, as I have said, don't believe that the criminals that we are dealing with are some little fellas on the street, on a street corner. That's not the criminals that are causing us the real problems. They are instruments. They are the ones they program and push their buttons. Who we are really looking out for now are those people who scan our media, follow what politicians are doing, seek to influence politicians, seek to bribe our public officials, seek to get access to our ports, who carry in contraband, who move large volumes of illegal goods and drugs and guns, and create large armies to protect that. And what we are doing, we will never let them know. But you would see in recent months that we have taken down some serious gangs. And remember now, we can't take down in the unconventional and extrajudicial sense. When we say we take down, we bring them before our court system. And they answer charges. And you just need to reflect as, you know, what has happened. And that needs to increase in pace, obviously. So there is a plan. And it is working quite well. Working quite well. But to answer your other part of the question, we have tabled in Parliament 3 times documents giving the general direction. At one budget debate, I tabled the general outlines of Plan Secure Jamaica, which was not just focused on the Ministry of National Security or crime, but it was focused on securing our telecommunications because that facilitates crime. It was focused on strengthening our ports because that facilitates crime. It was focused on strengthening our border protection. And you would see, for example, the acquisition of 2 long-range vessels. What is that about? You would have seen a strategy to equip the JDF with more helicopters. What is that about? But I can't go into all the details to tell you what it is that we are doing. But we have given the general outline. And I think that the public should now reject this political argument because that is all it is. That's the only thing they have to latch on to. But in doing, if we were to come out and give detail, that is ensuring that our plan doesn't work. And I'm kind of saddened that there are actually persons whose only mission in life is to ensure that your safety and security does not come to fruition. Well, I will never let that happen.
Thank you, sir. The time is well spent, everyone. We'll take one final question. On your behalf, Mr. Prime Minister, may I thank, too, the public servants who are here, who also, when you have your briefings, act as resource persons should you need more information and call on them. May I then give Ms. Chisholm...
As the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Tourism, I'm going to come up and ask you to tell us about all the beaches that we are improving.
Yes. But they serve a very useful purpose here this morning. Ms. Chisholm, you have the final question.
Wish we had a bit more time. Squeezing in 2 quick things, PM. Last year, the government launched Secure Park. Yesterday, we heard about plans to establish a crime commission. What's the
No, not a crime. I mean, that might have been an error. It's not. It's the violence. It's the violence. So remember, we've been talking about that. We're doing some discussions behind the scenes of how it should be comprised to develop the TOR. But since you have raised it, you know.
I was asking the
sure.
difference between the two, because the release said crime commission.
Sorry, that may have been an error. I spoke about the violence commission at it was the media, the CBU. Caribbean, right? They may have misinterpreted. I'd said that crime and violence is a major problem facing Jamaica. We have the plan now to deal with crime. The broader issue, however, is violence. And you would have seen me laying out now a direction where in my Emancipation Day message, I went to the cultural aspects of this epidemic of violence which is facing our nation. And now we want to put together a commission so that the Jamaican people start to see violence not as something that is accepted, but something that is wrong, and how do we change it?
Right, I was tacking on very quickly, Prime Minister. When will the country be getting details about the National Heroes Park Redevelopment Project, and when will the government be consulting with the people affected?
My understanding is that the government has always been consulting. We have always been moving in the areas, explaining what is happening. But I was away when there was a town hall, which I consider to be necessary to keep the public informed. But my perspective is that it may have been hijacked for political reasons. And I think that there has to be another meeting, and I do intend to have such a meeting, to place on record much of what was said, which was incorrect. I think that when it comes to these national projects, that we as a country should set aside all the political considerations and focus on what is in the best interest of the country. And I firmly believe that it is in the best interest of the country to have that area developed. No, we can't develop without the people. It was never the intention of the government to just go in and bulldoze and dislocate and remove people. But things require a process. We are not at that process just yet. We are still, and we could have gone and developed the project internally, bring it to a point where all the details have been resolved, and then we come to the public. No, what we did was, while we are developing the project internally, we are informing the public. So there are gaps in information. But people take that gap and exploit it, which ends up now making the project seem like some devious connivance of the government to undermine the people of the community. What benefit is that to Jamaica? Should the people who live in those communities remain in that way for the next 20, 30, 40 years, as they have been since the last 40 years? Who is saying, let us transform your community? Who has said it? What should the people who are working on the project do? Back away from it now? Which is effectively what has been created in the public domain. Should we leave it alone now? I say to Jamaica, action your prosperity. Action your progress. Associate with the projects that are improving the quality of your life. Look for the people who are saying to you, let us rebuild your community. And ignore those who are saying, well, if the community change, I may lose political power. Well, consider that those who have had the political power in your community for decades have never put a plan to improve it. I sat in that community as Minister of Education on the 4th floor, surveying the entire community. Walked it, participated in functions around there. Beautiful real estate, beautiful people, but no vision in the leadership. We have put a plan with vision, and all that some people are interested in doing is to tear it down. Action your prosperity. Focus on rebuilding your community. And we will not resile from that project. We are coming to your community to discuss it with you, to engage you, and to build a better Jamaica. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media. And there ends our quarterly briefing. We'll have another next quarter. We invite you now to recess to the back of the room for some refreshments. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
The hospitality industry and use brand Jamaica. And I know that Minister